All right, welcome to everyone on Zoom. Welcome to everyone on Facebook. Um, and welcome to the second installment of this series, which is called Inlook, Outlook, which is personal advice from the Rebbe. In this series, we are studying letters from the Rebbe to those who wrote to him seeking his personal advice, his counsel and advice. Now, last week we discussed the Rebbe's personal, hi Ellen, the Rebbe's personal experience back in Nazi-controlled Europe, where he was stuck as a refugee in Vichy and Nice, and he wrote a letter to one of the people that he was with as a refugee, and he gave him some advice on how to confront life's challenges. Now, the letter that we're going to be studying today, which the Rebbe wrote in the year 1957 or 1956, I believe, is a letter that's a few paragraphs long. And I'm going to first read the entire text, and then we're going to discuss what the Rebbe is saying section by section. So this letter that we're going to read right now is a response to a person who had written to the Rebbe about his personal struggles. Now, we don't know what the person wrote exactly in his letter, but from the Rebbe's response, I think we can figure out that this person was feeling very dejected, very discouraged. And the Rebbe responded with quite a few pointers on how a person can overcome such negative thoughts and negative feelings. I'm going to read this. It's going to be in English, so don't worry about that. You know something? I may be able to share for those on Zoom. Let's see. I'm going to share the screen for those of you on Zoom. Here we go. I hope you can see Sandy and Pam. Yeah, those of you on Zoom. I'm going to read in English so you can follow along. And if you're on Facebook, just give me 2 minutes so we can read this letter. This was September 18th, 1956. The Rebbe wrote, it's broken up into paragraphs here. So the Rebbe writes, in response to what you write regarding your state of mind. So the Rebbe says, number one, there are realities that exist outside of a person. There are also internal realities within a person. And finally, no worries, friend, good to see you. Finally, there are things whose reality consists only in the way that we think about them. At first glance, it may seem that because these thoughts are real, then it makes no difference what the source of the reality is. But the truth is otherwise. A person possesses the ability to evaluate their own feelings, to assess their veracity and validity. This internal evaluator influences our state of mind also when it operates behind the scenes in what is commonly referred to as the subconscious. Also, when this process is not consciously sensed, it is taking place in our minds. Now, don't worry if you don't understand the letter. I'm getting to this in a minute. It is obvious that the thoughts about which you write in your letter are of the third type of reality, which is more easily overcome than the other two types. Furthermore, often these thoughts and feelings will go away on their own when the person stops thinking about them, either due to external factors or when the person resolves to put them out of their mind. Certainly, you know all this already, but sometimes hearing it from another person, verbally or in writing, brings greater clarity. My hope is that the same will be the case in this instance. I am enclosing a copy of the communal letter I wrote for the past Rosh Hashanah. In it, you will find my view on a number of the points you touched on your letter, both by allusion and more explicitly, and which are contributing factors to the thoughts and feelings about which you wrote to me. I just want to skip a little bit to the end. Okay, so I'm actually going to skip totally to the end, and then we're going to discuss a few of the pointers here in the letter. So number one, let's start with the first point that the Rebbe brings out, which is, I think just as a general intro, what we think and what we feel is, in general, a reaction to the reality in which we find ourselves. Now, what is reality? So the Rebbe begins by pointing out what we call reality is actually a combination of three different things. Three different, totally different things. Number one, there's external realities. I think we can all know what these things are, especially now. These are things that happen outside of ourselves. We have very little control. If there's a hurricane or there's a pandemic shutting down the country. These are external, objective events. And obviously, of course, we can do our part to affect and impact the situation. But at the end of the day, this is an external reality that exists independently from us. So that's one type of reality. The second type of reality is an internal reality. This would include things like, our own personality traits, our own character traits, our own talents and abilities. And these realities are, of course, more subjective and than what's happening outside of ourselves. And our ability to change these things, this internal reality, is far greater than the external realities. But still, these are, it's not so easy. It still requires a very strong effort on our part to affect changes even within this area. But finally, this is what the Rebbe was mainly speaking about, which is there's realities of perception. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar or know what I'm referring to, but these are realities that are entirely the product of how we think about them. For example, you can have two people observing the same exact situation, literally, and one person sees great opportunity and the other person sees all the potential dangers involved in that perception reality. The first person is excited and the second person is very anxious and full of fear. The realities that they're experiencing is the product of how they perceive and they think about the circumstance. So this type of reality, as we'll see in just a moment, is the type of reality that we are most able to change, by far. So at first glance, it may seem that the source of a person's reality is irrelevant, because after all, if the person feels like this is a real situation and this is what's causing them to feel a certain way, then what difference does it make what type of reality is causing these feelings, right? Who cares about the source of these realities? Just make sure I didn't lose anyone. Yeah, there we go. So who really cares about the source of these realities? I'll tell you, it makes a very, very big difference, because the Rebbe rejects this way of thinking. Because human beings are not machines. At the end of the day, we all know however much we would like to be a machine, sometimes we're very not machine-like. Our minds are not computers, which you feed data at one end and then, a set of results come out on the other end. We have free choice. And on the most basic level, this means that we're self-critical and we evaluate our own thoughts and feelings and decide whether they are or not the right response to a given set of circumstances. Now, if we decide that they're not the right response, we can always change the way we think and the way we feel about something, right? We have the free choice to think and feel the way we do. Now, this evaluation process, whether this is the right response to something or not, takes place on two different levels. Ideally, it's a very conscious evaluation, right? You deliberately examine the validity of our thoughts and feelings. And the more we do this, the more the more self-aware we are. But even when we're not consciously doing it, we're not deliberately thinking about our thoughts and feelings, there's an ongoing subconscious process of self-evaluation in which our inner judge, decides which thoughts and feelings to endorse, which ones, should be rejected, etc. So that's the first point the Rebbe makes, that there's a massive difference between an external reality, which is totally independent of us, nothing we can do about it, or usually not. There's an internal reality, who we are, and finally, there is the realities, the way we perceive things to be. The realities that we perceive, so I'm giving a quick recap, Nathan. So the way we perceive things to be is very different for us, based on our experiences, based on our circumstances, and it's different for every single person. So we have to learn how to change those realities. Hi, Felicia. The Rebbe then proceeds in his letter to point out to the person writing the letter that the causes which the person writing the letter described as the source for his feelings of despair are of the third type of reality. Not the external reality, not the internal reality, but a reality that's the product of how we see and think about the situation. And therefore, the Rebbe continued that these feelings can be overcome. One way to do this, which is something we speak about all the time, which is that we choose how to think and how to feel about certain things that we experience. And we can decide to either reject those thoughts and feelings or to change them. And, the Rebbe says even simpler, an even simpler way to get rid of such negative thoughts and feelings is just stop indulging in these thoughts. Negative thoughts tend to feed on themselves. The more a person indulges in them, the worse they get, and they lead you to a much deeper despair, a much deeper way of thinking, of negativity, and it's just a vicious cycle. So often the best way to deal with these things is to find a better way to occupy your mind, thinking of and really just immersing yourself into happier and joyful activities is usually, most often, the most effective cure. So that's a second point the Rebbe brings out. Number one, that the realities that we think really exist are not really realities. It's because we think of them that way. And the Rebbe says because that's the way it is, it's so easy to change them. Either because we have full control over them, and you just decide to stop thinking about them, or stop thinking about negative thoughts and think about joyful thoughts to distract yourself from those things. Now, I want to point out another, here, one second. So another point the Rebbe brings out, which is something that it's such an important thing to think about. And I think during the coronavirus especially, we can relate to this very, very much. Towards the end of the letter, the Rebbe points out something very interesting, which is that often, and this happens to, I guess because, we have TV, we have internet, we have so many ways of finding out the news. If we all open the news, whether it's online, whether it's on the TV, it's a very common theme that you'll see in the Rebbe's letters, which is that there's a very common fact of human nature that we tend to focus and notice the negative more than the positive. In a city, take New York City, for example, which was hit terribly from the coronavirus. So it's a city where millions and millions of people make it home safely every single day, every single night, and it's that small handful of people. Sorry, not a small handful. There, the hundreds, if not thousands, of people that died in New York City. That was the focus of the news, because people making it home safely, people recovering, are not interesting news. We all know that, and it's something that we see this in the news a lot. But it's not just the news; it's the way we think. In a city, New York City, where millions of people make it home safely every night, it's the small handful of violent, crimes that are going to be reported in the news. The one plane crash that you'll see in the news gets more attention than the tens of thousands of flights that safely transport people from one destination to the other. So this obviously creates a very false impression of how bad a situation is. And it's not just the Rebbe saying this. Psychologists and sociologists all call this a negativity bias. And they provide all sorts of explanations for why we have this negativity bias. And the Rebbe repeatedly, time and time again, encourage people to see past this false impression of this negativity bias, to look at the actual facts, see how prevalent the good is over the bad. And the Rebbe really applies this to the specific situation of this person writing the letter. Because when we're experiencing a negative mental state, I guess you can call it that, suffering from despair or depression, so it may seem to us that we're fated to remain in this bad place. And overcoming that is going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible. And all too often, it's this mistaken belief that traps us in this place of negativity. Because if we only realize that our situation is actually reversible, that itself would provide us with the energy to get ourselves out of it. Because we're always discouraged when when you see something that is very hard to overcome, if not impossible to overcome, you're ready to just give up before you even start. And the same things with ourselves, that this notion, this belief that it's impossible to overcome this negativity is itself the destruction of how we perceive ourselves and how we're able to overcome our feelings. And we're always stuck in this negativity bias. Every day, millions of people, they feel lousy. This happens every single day. We all have these days. Everyone has their causes or their reasons why their day is just a lousy day. And the great majority of them, of the millions of people who feel lousy, overcome these feelings and move on to find encouragement or optimism in their lives. But we don't hear about those cases, right? We only hear about the people who felt lousy and it didn't end up so good, right? Why don't you hear about the other people who actually overcome the feelings of lousiness and these negative feelings? Because that's the normal and natural course of events. The Rebbe said in the letter that we each have our inner evaluator, which monitors our thoughts and feelings, and it selects for us, our subconscious, which are useful, which are counterproductive. And consciously and even subconsciously, we make countless decisions every single day to reject the negative perspective on reality, and we try to embrace the positive perspective on reality. And it's only on these rare occasions when the natural process fails, and that's when we fall into not such great places. Once we realize this, the Rebbe writes, once we realize this, that itself provides enough encouragement to change your perspective. So I just want to end off with one important point here. The final point of the letter, which I did not read inside, which is the Rebbe makes a very interesting statement, which in truth, everything he said up until this point is besides the point and not really necessary. Because everything that we said up until now relates to how we feel about things and what we can do to change the way we feel. But is that what we should be focused on? Should we be thinking about how we feel, or should we be thinking about how or what is our task and what is our purpose and mission in life? And the Rebbe's attitude, and I think this is something we can all relate to and understand very, very well in our personal lives, is that when a person is truly focused, again, listen closely, what's more important, thinking about how we feel or thinking about what is our task in life? The Rebbe's attitude was that when a person is truly focused on their mission in life, on what the Creator sent them into this world to achieve, they don't waste time and headspace, obsessing over their own personal state of mind. These feelings of despair are luxuries that they don't have time for. You don't have time to indulge in these kind of thoughts. And very well said, Felicia, life is 90% attitude and 10% circumstances. It's very important to focus on our mission rather than on ourselves. What we focus on, when we focus on our mission, not ourselves, a totally different feeling and emotion takes over us. Do you know what that feeling is? And I'm sure all of us have these moments of when we focus on our mission and not on ourselves. That feeling is called a sense of joy. Sense of joy, literally a sense of joy. And at first this may seem a little bit counterintuitive, but what the Rebbe repeatedly said in his letters and his talks 50 and 60 and 70 years ago, suddenly is coming out as scientific research in the field of psychology, that we assume that happiness comes from personal achievement and personal success. That's what we think. The more successful you are, the more you achieve, the happier you'll be. But in fact, the very opposite is true. Because the more we focus on achieving our personal success, the more we suffer from depression and other psychological problems. Because, think about it the other way. The more we lose ourselves in devoting ourselves to a goal that's greater than ourselves, the more joy we experience in our life. And everyone knows their thing, their sense of fulfillment of what their mission is, what their task is in life. And that's something that's not, easy to find out, but it's something we should all work on. Stop thinking about how you feel. maybe it's important to start focusing better or more often on what should you be doing in life. Everyone knows that when you do something good, you feel good about it, right? You help a stranger, you help a friend. It feels good, right? Why? Because you're doing the right thing. And this is what you're supposed to be doing. Adding light into the world, adding light and positivity into the world is what you're supposed to be doing. So to put it simply, is that ego and ego-driven goals don't create happiness at all. And in fact, the more we obsess over what we want, and the more we obsess over what we want and feel, the more depressed we become. And on the other hand, humility and dedication to something greater than ourselves is probably the easiest path to joy. So I want to end off with that all the things we said about the realities, what's the true reality, what's not the true reality. At the end of the day, we have control over how we see things, of how we perceive things. It's all in our control. And it's just a matter of how much we want to take control, what we want to see, what we don't want to see. Everyone hears and sees what they want to see and hear. That's just the way we are. We're humans. We're not machines. And the Rebbe's lesson here is that instead of trying to focus so much on how we feel, which is an important thing that we could control as well, in addition to that, focus more on what you should be doing. What's your task in life? And you'll find that you'll be so much happier than thinking about how you feel. So I want to wish everyone that blessing, that you'll be able to focus on our task and mission in life, to be better people, to be a better parent, to be a better child, to be a better neighbor, to be a better friend, a teacher, whatever it could be. Focus on what you're supposed to be doing in life, and you'll find that the sense of joy will be 1,000 times greater than if it's about your own personal goals. So l'chaim to that. Good to see you all. Before we finish here, we have a very exciting event next Tuesday at 7 o'clock. It's going to be broadcast live on Facebook and on Zoom. You'll be getting it in your emails as well. It's going to be a musical farbrengen. I have my colleague, Rabbi Moshe Biton, who grew up in Caracas, Venezuela, and he has a fascinating story how he became a Chabad, a rabbi today. He spent time in Costa Rica, in Venezuela, in LA. He's unbelievable, and he sings and he plays the guitar. He has beautiful stories and he sings. So it'll be a nice thing in honor of the Rebbe's yahrzeit next Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. I hope to see you all then. You'll be getting reminders, and tell your friends and family. It'll be a very, very nice event. And hope to see you then. Have a good one, everyone.